Welcome to the Influence and Inspire podcast, episode 26. And I'm delighted to say my guest today is Mac Alonge, and he's the CEO of the Equal Group. How you doing, Mac?
I'm really good. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Mac, before we get into talking about the Equal Group, can you tell me a bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. So prior to starting the Equal Group, I was in the energy sector for 10 years. So
Hmm.
my background is in economics. So I was a regulatory economist, spent 10 years working for the likes of KPMG, National Grid, the UK government and Scottish government. Um, so specialisms ranged from kind of electricity, gas, water and metering. Um, Basically focused on regulatory price controls
Hmm.
as well as strategic advice, typically at an executive level. Um, and kind of over the years, I noticed a bit of a lack of diversity in relation to seniority, most fundamentally,
Hmm.
um, and started having some conversations with leaders in the space and just asked, what can we do to make sure that diversity and inclusion is pushed and is meaningful and effective. Um, and there was a bit of a hesitation because people didn't really know what to do. And so I started looking at things from a data perspective.
Hmm.
Being a regulatory economist, we typically use large data sets to
Yep.
tell a story and help organizations to understand what that story looks like and how that story is likely to change over the next kind of 5, 10, 15 years. So essentially, at the Equal Group, we take the same kind of focus, being data driven in terms of what we do,
Hmm.
ensuring that organizations have sufficient qualitative and quantitative data to firstly understand the situation, so understand
Yep.
exactly what's going on at the moment, and then secondly to evidence change over time, so seeing how the situation's changed both from a qualitative and quantitative perspective.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. So the Equal Group was set up about 5 years ago. What would you say was the main purpose of setting up the group at that time?
Yeah, so really just to again make fundamental changes to how diversity and inclusion is done.
Yeah.
Our observations were that a lot of companies saw diversity and inclusion as something that was kind of fluffy, a little bit intangible in terms of the benefits, and it's kind of spoken about as an afterthought.
Yeah.
And really, we've been kind of relying on the McKinsey business case for quite a while.
Hmm. Hmm.
And for us, it's a case of actually each individual company has drivers and benefits that they can seek to obtain by investing in diversity and inclusion. But really, it's about bringing those to life to make sure that equality, diversity, and inclusion sits at the heart of what organizations do, really changing leadership perspectives in a way that ensures that diversity and inclusion is a key focus as opposed to being an afterthought.
Okay. Okay. Good. Um, so I don't actually know how old you are, but I remember when the MacPherson report came out in roughly around 1999, and I know a
Mhm.
lot of organisations try to invest in methods to be more inclusive to BME people at the time. Um, did you did you see any of those changes, and did you think any of those changes worked?
Yeah, a good question. So I'm unfortunately or fortunately old enough to remember the MacPherson reports.
Yeah.
I grew up in South East London, so
Yeah.
I, quite close to where unfortunately Stephen Lawrence was murdered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of well aware of the social climate at the time. And
Yeah.
when you think about things like systemic racism,
Mm-hmm.
um, institutional racism, really what you're looking for is a systemic or institutional change.
Yeah.
That the recommendations were quite clear in terms of what needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The verdict, I think, was the first time the word institutional racism or the term institutional racism was levied against a public sector organization.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd hope to see wholesale changes.
Yeah.
The fact that we're here kind of, you know, 20 odd years later,
Yeah.
still having conversations about systemic racism, still talking about institutional racism is shocking. and you have to kind of reflect on what are the changes that have been made, if any. And for the most part, those changes have been rhetorical. So
Yeah.
every company now has, we are an equal opportunities employer
Yeah.
as the standard tagline on their website. What does that mean? What does it look like? And where's the evidence of that?
Yeah.
And these are the questions that we're asking organizations on a regular basis now, to say, actually, if you do believe that Black Lives Matter, if you do believe that you're an equal opportunities employer, if you do believe that everybody has a fair and open chance of excelling within your organization, show us the
Yeah.
data, show us the proof, the evidence of why that is the case.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that kind of comes on to what type of methods do the equal group use to tackle diversity and inclusion? So, when you go into organizations, what kind of methods do you use?
Yeah, so firstly, we do quality, diversity, and inclusion data audits. So
Mm-hmm.
typically, that looks at the data that is within the organization, understanding that typically organizations aren't really good at collecting data,
Yeah.
which stems from a historic lack of trust. People don't necessarily trust the organization's intentions
Mm.
with their data, understanding that actually the data might be used in a way that is negative.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
typically that's not the reality, but the perception at least is there. So a lot of our work is around changing that perception.
Mm-hmm.
So our audits, we come in as an independent organization, we conduct the audit, we ensure that there's an anonymity. So if you are disclosing your personal information, if you are giving views about how you consider the company, your experiences working at the company,
Yeah.
we protect your anonymity 100%. So
Okay.
that information will be aggregated up so that nobody can pinpoint who has said what,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but at an aggregate level, we can understand what is the general experience for men versus women,
Yeah.
or BAME versus in white
Mm-hmm.
British,
Mm-hmm.
um, people of different sexual orientations, religions, socioeconomic backgrounds, educational backgrounds, and then just not just looking at things from a representation point of view, but also looking at things from an inclusion point of view. So, how do you feel on a day-to-day basis? Do you feel that you can authentically be yourself? Do you feel that you belong within the organization? Do you
Yeah.
feel supported in the way that you conduct your role?
Mm-hmm.
And really giving that kind of multifaceted approach helps to open an organization's eyes to the work that needs to be done. And as I said, gives them a baseline, a benchmark to build upon.
Yeah. So that, and I suppose that's some of the ways you do it. And you mentioned digital and using data. Now I know
Yep.
one of the methods that I saw, it's probably been around for 10 years or so, where you have what is it, applications that don't disclose your name or your age.
Mm-hmm.
Are those some of the methods you use, and how useful do you think those methods are?
Yeah, so we provide anonymity across the board.
Mm-hmm.
The I think the applications that provide blind CVs
Yeah.
um, are good as a starting point,
Mm-hmm.
but they are limited in that you have to go a little bit deeper to understand actually what are the systemic barriers that are in place. So
Yeah.
if you're asking for 10, 15 years senior management experience,
Mm.
that limits your potential applicant pool in the
Yeah.
first place. So introducing name blind or age blind CVs isn't necessarily going to help you if your requirements are biased in the first place.
Mm. Mm.
Um, Again, I guess our focus is to be data driven first and foremost. So any evidence that we collect can help organizations to pinpoint exactly what's going on. So looking at the application process, we can identify whether you have an initial candidate pool that is representative of your local population, whether it's representative of the sector within which you work, and also understanding how that candidate profile
Mm-hmm.
changes for each stage of the application process. So you might find that actually you get quite a lot of diversity in the application, the initial application stage. But as you go through the interview rounds, that diversity gets lost.
Yeah.
we can then look at each of those stages to understand why certain demographics tend to fall out of those
Hmm.
processes.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Exactly. Exactly. And interestingly, what are some of the findings that you come across when you're in these organisations?
Yes, it's a good question, and I think that I'm never truly shocked at some of the findings that I
Mm.
find. So
Yeah.
from a representation point of view, typically you'll find, obviously it'll change from organization to organization, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, a lack of diversity within leadership teams,
Hmm.
a distinct difference in inclusion views. So when you broach questions like, I feel that I belong, I feel that I can authentically be myself,
Yeah.
um, typically leadership will have one view, and entry level individuals or individuals that haven't been at the company that long will have a completely different view. So those are things that are always interesting to highlight. And then you've got kind of demographic splits. So understanding that if 90% of your organization really enjoys working for your company, it's really about looking at that 10% to see what the shared characteristics are. And what you will typically find is
Hmm.
that the 10% that don't necessarily enjoy working for your company are underrepresented groups.
Mm.
So it's about digging deeper into those demographic areas, understanding what are the reasons that they don't have the same positive experience working for your organization.
Yeah. No, that's fine. And how do you approach organisations for your service, or do organisations approach you? How does that work?
Yeah, so recently it's been a lot of kind of inbound, so a lot of
Hmm.
people reaching out to us. We have got a significant amount of interest from word of mouth. So the people that we work with love us, love the service that we deliver. They know that we are committed to seeing sustainable change. I think diversity and inclusion generally has developed a bit of a bad rap over the years, where
Yeah.
you get kind of consultants that come in and they do an hour, 2 hours, half a day workshop, and you don't see them again for another year.
Mm.
We are the opposite to that. So we really embed ourselves into organizations, really with a view to helping them to own equality, diversity, and inclusion. We don't see it as something that you should just completely outsource. There has to be a level of ownership, there has to be a level of accountability, there has to be a level of comfort for senior leaders to own the narrative on equality, diversity, and inclusion.
Mm.
So I say that to say that a lot of our work comes from word of mouth.
Yeah.
We generally get really good reviews and really good feedback from our clients, and that's standing us in good stead.
Okay. And so you mentioned you getting a lot of inbound people coming to you for services. So what impact has the Black Lives Matter movement had on the Equal Group?
Yes, it's been crazy. I
Mm.
think the the immediate impact is just our inboxes have been rammed.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah. Yeah.
last 2 or 3 months have just been crazy
Yeah.
with the amount of people reaching out, the amount of organizations that have been kind of getting it wrong as well. So we've had a lot of conversations,
Mm.
probably in the earlier days where companies had put up black squares and statements of solidarity,
Yeah.
and then had been ripped to pieces
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
on kind of social media, with
Mm.
people sharing views, sharing experiences that are completely at odds with what these companies are saying in relation to their support of Black Lives Matter.
Mm.
Um, but I think generally it's been positive. I think the focus has been needed. I think it's quite tragic that it's taken such drastic measures for people to start understanding that they have to do some work in relation to Black lives,
Mm.
within the workplace and within society as a whole. And hopefully, this will be a key turning point, and people will really continue to do the work even after the media hype has died down,
Yeah.
and really kind of invest in ensuring that their solutions and resolutions around Black lives and
Mm.
equality and diversity more generally is sustainable and is significant, rather than just the typical process of doing your annual unconscious bias training.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And in the last 3 months where it has been busy and you have gone into organisations, do you feel there's a real want to make that change, or do you feel it is just just the time we're in at the moment?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. It's a bit of
Mm,
a bit of an unknown. I think that the optimist in me wants to believe that companies genuinely care
yeah,
and that leaders genuinely care.
yeah,
However, we've kind of been here before,
yeah,
and we've had kind of the social media uproar, and we've had companies pledging support in various guises.
mm,
Um, and the pessimist part of me says that actually, what happens when lockdown's over
yeah,
fully and go back into the workplace and resume their normal, quote unquote, normal
mm,
ways of working?
yeah,
Are people still going to be hashtagging Black Lives Matter?
yeah,
Are people still going to be looking for issues of inequality to support and to highlight? Um, but for me, it really comes down to leadership. You
yeah,
know, I think leadership sets the tone. I think as a society, we've become accustomed to poor leaders. So
mm-hmm,
you look at, and without trying to turn this into a political debate,
mm,
you look at the likes of Donald Trump and you
yeah,
look at the likes of Boris Johnson, and they've just given us an abundance of case studies of how not to lead.
mm,
But really, what we need to be looking for in leadership from a societal perspective is leaders that say things and mean those things.
mm, mm-hmm,
So if leaders have come out and said that Black Lives Matter and they've made commitments, we want to be able to hold these leaders to account. We want to be able to revisit the conversation in 6 to 12 months' time and say, okay, you committed to doing X, Y, and Z.
yeah,
How have you done, and what more can be done?
mm,
Because it's not something that you can tick a box and say, okay, we're done with equality now. There's
yeah,
always going to be progress to be made, and you want leaders to be constantly seeking for areas of improvement.
mm, mm. Okay, so just on that leadership, I mean, I did want to ask a question on leadership, but I think you've covered it. But from a leadership point of view, what other improvements can be made, and do you think we need black people in those leadership positions to maintain this momentum?
That is a very, very key question. And I think there's definitely a need for greater levels of representation.
Mm,
There's definitely a need to acknowledge our gaps in terms of where people are,
yeah,
and kind of what demographics are in positions of leadership, and what demographics are missing from positions of leadership.
mm,
In terms of keeping this momentum going, I don't think it necessarily matters who the leader is,
yeah,
but what we would want to see is leaders that get it, leaders that understand the social context, leaders that understand their place in the market. So, I think gone are the days of having companies that just do all manner of kind of atrocities,
mm,
and their primary objective is just to make money.
yeah,
I think now as a society we've developed a little bit more of a social conscience.
mm-hmm,
We care about how companies treat people. We care about kind of the environmental impact that companies have.
yeah,
So with that being said, I think any leader that is worth their weight will acknowledge that actually they have a social obligation. Part of that social obligation is to understand equality, diversity, and inclusion,
yeah,
understand the role that they play, and understand the opportunities for them to do better.
mm-hmm,
And if they don't understand those things, we as potential employees, we as potential consumers, should be making our voices heard in terms of what our expectations are.
yeah. No, definitely, definitely. And just to go back to a bit of the detail about what you actually do when you get into a workplace. I know you have stop focus groups and open conversations. That's always interested me. How do you get people to feel comfortable talking about race at work? It's been difficult. I think it's probably been difficult for all of us as black people, because as soon as you mention something, someone says, "Oh, he's got a chip on his shoulder." So how do you give? What do you do, or what does the Equal Group do to give workers confidence so they can be open and speak about these kind of issues?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think there's a number of different methods that we use. So one is to develop a wider understanding of context.
Mm-hmm.
I think context is everything. Everything. We began this conversation by talking about institutional racism,
Yeah.
systemic racism,
Mm-hmm.
and generally what we find is that there is no understanding of the way that race operates within the professional environment.
Mm.
So typically, a lot of our work starts with um, taking people on that journey to understand actually Black Lives Matter isn't just something that is in the States and
Mm.
isn't something that's just to do with police brutality,
Yeah.
but it has implications in relation to the way that we work on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
When we start to look at things like microaggressions, when we start to look at things like performative allyship, when we look at even the way that certain communities are excluded from certain roles, and systemically there are barriers that are in place for certain communities that
Mm.
other communities don't necessarily have to grapple with.
Yeah.
So really increasing that universal understanding of exactly what is the context within which we operate,
Mm.
and therefore what is our response to that. We also supplement that with data, so
Mm-hmm.
understanding that there's both qualitative and quantitative data that can shed a light on the difference in opinion, difference in experience, from a race, but also from an intersectional perspective. So understanding that actually typically protected characteristics, the presence and or absence of,
Mm-hmm.
will greatly improve or worsen somebody's experience within the workplace. So
Yeah.
if you are a person of color who also happens to be part of the LGBT Q community,
Mm-hmm.
if you are somebody that also has caring responsibilities, if you happen to have a physical or non-physical disability,
Mm-hmm.
what then is your experience in the workplace?
Yeah.
And really just shedding a light on kind of how some of these factors interact with each other and shape our experiences. And therefore, there needs to be an acknowledgement of the different levels of privilege that we have in different contexts.
Mm.
And also, there needs to be recognition of the things that we can do, both individually and collectively, to firstly identify
Mm-hmm.
and secondly to remove some of these barriers. And when we talk about institutional racism, we make it very clear that we're not talking about individuals, we're not talking about um, individual racism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of lens, that kind of perspective, allows it to be less sensitive and
Yeah.
less personal.
Yeah.
So that's where you can kind of move away from some of the, he's got a chip on his shoulder, or this is,
Mm.
something that is personal, as opposed to something that is systemic, that we will have a role to play in resolving.
Yeah. Okay. And I just wonder, we do, again, following the MacPherson report, I know a few organisations were putting in positive discrimination policies.
Mhm.
Is that something that you would recommend today? And if not, what are the issues around that you see?
um would I recommend it? I think if there is a need for it, if you can kind of justify that approach,
Mm-hmm.
one thing I would say is that there has to be kind of a more sustainable way of looking at things. So
Mm-hmm.
understanding that obviously the situation that we're in at the moment isn't ideal,
Mm.
but we didn't just arrive here by chance.
Yeah.
There are certain things that have happened systemically that have led to the outcomes that we're seeing today. So it's about not just sticking a plaster on things to say, you know, if we get better levels of representation, we'll be fine.
Mm.
That's not the case at all. It's about looking at things in context, looking at things from a systemic point of view to say actually what is our role in ensuring that the education system is fair, balanced, and representative of the communities that we serve.
Mm-hmm.
What is our role in ensuring that the application and that the kind of recruitment process is fair and transparent, and that we are acknowledging the potential barriers. And I spoke earlier on about kind of if you're looking for senior individuals, requiring people to have 15, 20 years C-suite experience,
Yeah.
will be talking specifically to one or potentially two demographics
Mm.
rather than identifying actually that there is potential
Yeah.
in everybody.
Yeah.
Potential is distributed um, quite randomly,
Mm.
but opportunity isn't.
Yes.
So we need to acknowledge the gaps that exist and look at the sustainable ways that we can address those. And just having a positive discrimination policy in isolation
Mm.
isn't necessarily going to get you the long-term results that you want.
Okay. Okay. No, that's fine. So if let's look up, go a bit forward, and this looks at an organisation that you've probably been in, done some work in. What kind of things would you expect to see an organisation do that has benefited from working with the Equal Group?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a number of organisations we've been working with for quite a while now.
Mm.
A recent success story is a management consultancy that we're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, when we started working with them, equality, diversity, and inclusion was uh, kind of met with some skepticism,
Mm-hmm.
so some slight hesitation.
Mm.
The leadership team reluctantly engaged us,
Mm-hmm.
reluctantly broached the conversation, reluctantly undertook the equality, diversity, and inclusion data audit.
Yeah.
The information that they were then able to obtain following that audit really opened their eyes to how important equality, diversity, and inclusion was.
Mm-hmm.
So the managing partner, in the report that we produced for the organisation, there was a verbatim comment taken from one of their members of staff that said it was a young female within the organisation. She said that she really enjoyed working for the company
Mm-hmm.
and also wanted to have a family, but didn't see how she could do the two at the same time. So felt
Okay.
like she would have to either give up her personal aspirations to have a family or would have to give up her career. And
Mm.
that's something that the managing partner really kind of really made it hit home,
Yeah.
that actually implementing flexible working isn't a hard thing to do.
Mm.
It was just that his lack of lived experience had limited his ability to understand actually what are the implications of not doing those things.
Yeah.
So we've been working with them for quite a while. As I said, we've gone back and done a second audit with them, and just the transformation. So when we first went into the organization, we went to one of their all staff days and we presented. Our presentation was about 5 to 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when we came back this time, we had an hour and a half slot,
Mm.
and it was interesting to see and observe the way in which the management, the leadership team, really spoke about equality, diversity, inclusion, and
Mm.
now it's firmly embedded into their approach. It's in the fabric of their values, and we. So last year when we did the audit, we achieved an engagement rate of 85%.
Okay.
And when we say engagement rates, everybody who engages, we get 100% of their demographic data.
Mm-hmm.
This year, we were able to achieve 97%.
Oh
So
wow.
that just shows you exactly kind of the level of data that we can get, given the right circumstances.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. So Mac, if people want to find out more about Equal Group, or yourself, how do they go about contacting you or the group?
Yeah, sure. So the website is www.theequalgroup.com. My email address is mac, so mac@theequalgroup.com.
Mm-hmm.
We're on all social media at the Equal Group. LinkedIn is pretty good, so
Mm.
give us a follow on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
Twitter, Instagram, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So Matt, it sounds like you and the Equal Group are doing a great job. Keep up the good work, and thanks for joining me today. It's been a very enlightening conversation.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Appreciate that.
All right, thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye.